Take a look at this school bus from 1939. 80 years later, it looks almost exactly the same. Some buses don't even have seatbelts. Meanwhile, cars have undergone massive redesigns in that same time period. How can a vehicle designed to safely transport kids seem so out of date? In the US, school buses transport 26 million kids every day. Before buses, kids rode to school in horse-drawn school wagons. By the 1930s, roads had expanded and more types of automobiles were available, which meant school buses were more common. But early school buses were a hodgepodge of different styles and types of vehicles. Not great for safety or cost effectiveness. Just look at these New York Times headlines from the 30s. There were no universal standards for all buses to follow, but in 1939, all that started to change. Frank Sear was a professor of rural education at Columbia University. He recognized the role school buses played in rural education, finding that from 1926 to 1938, the number of school buses increased 132%. Sear led a conference of transportation officials, educators, and school bus manufacturers. The group came up with the minimum standards for school buses, a set of 44 rules all buses should adhere to. This included details like length, aisle width, and even the iconic yellow color. The group chose yellow because it was the most quickly identified on the road, and the black lettering stood out even in dim light. A lot of what you see in modern buses was first decided at that conference. But it's been 80 years. Take a look at this school bus from 1939, since then, right? It might not
80
look
years
like
later,
it, but
it
there
looks
have been a
almost
lot of
exactly
changes
the same.
inside the bus.
Some buses don't
including
even have
rollover
seatbelts.
protection, safer
Meanwhile,
fuel
cars have
systems,
undergone
and massive
colors.
redesigns in that same Although
time
a
period.
few notable additions
How can a
do
vehicle
stand out,
designed to safely
like
transport
wheelchair
kids
accessibility,
seem
emergency
so out of
exit
date.
windows, and the stop sign arm. So the changes have been
In the
incremental,
US, school buses
as opposed
transport
to a
26
huge million kids but every day.
that's actually not a
Before
problem.
buses, kids
Because
rode to
school
school in
buses are the
horse-drawn
safest
school
way to
wagons.
get to school.
By the
70 times
1930s,
safer than a
roads had
car,
expanded,
according to
and
the
more
National
types of
Highway
automobiles
Traffic
were
Safety
available,
Administration.
which meant
From
school
2008
buses
to
were more
2017,
common.
71 passengers
But early
were killed
school
in
buses
school bus
were a
crashes.
hodgepodge
Out of
of different
26
styles
million
and types of
daily
vehicles.
riders.
Not great
In fact,
for
the
safety
number of deaths
or
each
cost
year
effectiveness
is less than 1%
Just look
of
at these
nationwide
New York
traffic
Times
deaths.
headlines from the 30s.
So, what makes school buses so safe?
Well, you might have noticed
There
that
were
school
no
buses
universal
are big
standards
and
for
heavy,
all buses to
over
follow.
7
But
times
in
heavier than a
1939,
car when filled.
all that
That
started
means
to change.
they can absorb a crash better, and passengers
Frank
feel
Sear
less
was
a
a
professor
professor
of rural education.
Their
at
solid
Columbia
frame also
University.
helps prevent damage
He
in a
recognized the role school
But
buses
it's
played
not
in
just
rural
their
education.
size.
The
Finding
color
that
from
flashing lights
1926
and
to
stop signal
1938
all help keep
the
school
number of
buses
school
safe.
buses
In
increased.
fact, school buses are the most
132%.
regulated vehicles on
Sear
the
led
road.
a conference
And
of
because they're all the
transportation
same,
officials,
they're easily
educators,
recognized.
and school bus
And
manufacturers.
nearby drivers know to be
The group
extra
came up
cautious.
with the minimum
A drastic
standards
design
for school
change,
buses.
like the color, could
A set of
modernize the look.
44
But
rules
it might
all
not get
buses
the
should
attention
adhere to.
of drivers
This
as
included
quickly.
details like length.
Oh, and if you're
aisle
wondering
width,
about the
and
seatbelts,
even the
big school
iconic
buses
yellow
don't
color.
need them.
The group
They use
chose
something
yellow
called
because
crash
it was the
protection
most
through
quickly identified on
compartmentalization
the road,
to protect
and the
riders.
black lettering stood
Those
out even in
unassuming
dim
seats
light.
are actually designed to
A lot of
absorb
what you
the
see in
energy
modern
of a crash
buses was
and
first
cushion
decided
the
at
impact.
that conference. Although 8
But
states
it's
currently
been 80
require
years.
seatbelts on buses.
Something must have changed
But the
since
smaller
then,
buses
right?
that are closer to the
It might
size
not
of a
look
van
like it,
do
but
need
there have been
seatbelts.
a lot of changes
So
inside
the school bus you rode in as a kid,
including
is
rollover
probably similar
protection,
to the one
safer
your
fuel
parents rode in.
systems, and taller
But changes
seats.
might be
Although
coming.
a few notable
Remember the
additions
conference
do
that Frank
stand
Sear
out.
led?
It's
Like
now called
wheelchair
the National
accessibility,
Congress on
emergency
School
exit windows,
Transportation.
and the stop
It
sign
meets about
arm.
every 5 years
So
to
the
vote on
changes have been
to school bus
incremental,
standards.
as opposed to
This year's
huge
topics could
redesign.
include things like
But
electric
that's
buses
actually
and
not
track
a
vans.
problem. Because
But
school
whether
buses
it's to
are
save
the
money,
safest way
reduce
to get to
pollution,
school,
or modernize
70
the
times
look.
safer than
All
a car,
changes have to fulfill
according
the
to the
same
National
basic
Highway
requirement
Traffic
Frank
Safety
Sear had
Administration.
in 1939.
From 2008 to
Does this
2017,
make school
71
buses
passengers were
safer?
killed in school bus crashes, out of 26 million daily riders. In fact, the number of deaths each year is less than 1% of nationwide traffic deaths. So, what makes school buses so safe? Well, you might have noticed that school buses are big and heavy, over 7 times heavier than a car when filled. That means they can absorb a crash better, and passengers feel less force in a crash. Their solid frame also helps prevent damage in a rollover. But it's not just their size. The color, flashing lights, and stop signal all help keep school buses safe. In fact, school buses are the most regulated vehicles on the road. And because they're all the same, they're easily recognized. And nearby drivers know to be extra cautious. A drastic design change, like the color, could modernize the look, but it might not get the attention of drivers as quickly. Oh, and if you're wondering about the seatbelts, big school buses don't need them. They use something called crash protection through compartmentalization to protect riders. Those unassuming seats are actually designed to absorb the energy of a crash and cushion the impact. Although 8 states currently require seatbelts on buses. But the smaller buses that are closer to the size of a van do need seatbelts. So, the school bus you rode in as a kid is probably similar to the one your parents rode in. But changes might be coming. Remember the conference that Frank Sear led? It's now called the National Congress on School Transportation. It meets about every 5 years to vote on changes to school bus standards. This year's topics could include things like electric buses and tracking apps. But whether it's to save money, reduce pollution, or modernize the look, all changes have to fulfill the same basic requirement Frank Sear had in 1939. Does this make school buses safer?